You live under my roof, you follow my rules. That's what she said, and that's where it started. Not the story exactly, but the unraveling. See, I wasn't a stranger to compromise. You don't marry a man like Ryan without learning how to make peace with half-spoken truths and Sunday dinner smiles. But when his mother, my mother-in-law, reminded me whose name was on the mortgage, something in me didn't bend. It broke. This isn't one of those loud stories. There were no slammed doors, no thrown wine glasses, just quiet things, like rent receipts disappearing from the counter, like whispered conversations that stopped when I walked in, like a soft knock on our bedroom door followed by, "We'll be keeping the thermostat where we want it." Little things, until they weren't. And maybe that's the story I want to tell you. Not about revenge exactly, but about fairness, about knowing where the lines are drawn, and learning what happens when someone crosses them just one too many times. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own life, if you've ever smiled through clenched teeth because speaking up meant losing peace, then I think you'll understand why I kept every receipt, and why I stopped apologizing for reading them out loud. This story might surprise you. It might feel a little too real. But I hope you'll stay with me until the end. And if you believe in justice, the quiet kind, go ahead and subscribe. Because some stories don't just deserve to be heard. They deserve to be remembered. The porch light flickered once, then glowed steady, its amber spill just touching the edge of the damp welcome mat. I had changed the bulb 2 nights ago. It wasn't the kind of task you announce or expect thanks for. I wiped down the glass cover, too. The old one had soot clinging to the inside like residue from arguments never spoken aloud. I swept the front step after. Oak leaves curled at the edges like letters never mailed, damp from last week's drizzle. The broom bristles were stiff with dust. I didn't mind. Small rituals keep the day clean. I didn't need to be told. Inside, I ran a cloth over the entryway floor, 2 steps in, to where shoes naturally scuffed. It wasn't muddy, just dulled from use. A quiet sponge, a bucket with warm water, and I moved in straight lines. No music, no sighs. Just the rhythm of doing what needed doing. No one asked me to. That's the thing about being a guest in your own family's home. You learn to fix things before they're called broken. You learn to tidy silence before it becomes resentment. I wasn't raised to take up too much space, and I wasn't here to make statements, only to make myself useful. It wasn't my house, but it wasn't not mine either. A twilight in between. I didn't say anything when I finished. I folded the rag and tucked it under the sink where it had always lived. When I stood back up, the porch light hummed above the doorway behind me. That low, electric breath. I didn't turn to look. I just stood there, a second longer, as if waiting for the house to say thank you. It didn't. Mom said, "If you're staying rent-free, you can at least keep the place clean." Her tone wasn't sharp, it was neutral. That's worse somehow. Indifference that sounds like logic. It's the kind of sentence you can't argue with because it carries the weight of something that should be true. Except it isn't. I had just finished wiping the fridge seal, noticing the way dust collects in corners you forget are corners. My hands smelled faintly of vinegar and rubber. The sponge sat in the sink like a used-up thought. Her voice floated from the living room. I didn't answer right away. I'd learned not to. Delay is safer. A pause lets you check your temperature. Never respond from heat. "I know," I said finally. That was all. She didn't look up from the magazine on her lap. "It's just good manners." I nodded, though she couldn't see. I don't know who I was agreeing with. Maybe with the idea that manners meant performing gratitude. But gratitude to me was replacing what broke. Scrubbing where things dulled, holding still when I wanted to scream, not slamming doors, not crying when things chipped. There are many ways to pay for space. Not all of them are cash. She turned the page. I turned back to my quiet tasks. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon and floor wax, the scent of domestic neutrality. It's strange, the little ways we negotiate for belonging. I wiped down the window ledge. One of the screws on the curtain rod had rusted slightly. I noted it in my head, something to fix tomorrow. I could already hear her telling someone at church or bridge night, "Claire's staying with me for a while. She's helpful. She keeps things neat." Like I was a nice, polite stain that hadn't set in too deep. It started with a hiss I couldn't locate. Somewhere behind the kitchen wall, water was bleeding into silence. I crouched by the sink, listening. It wasn't urgent yet, just steady, like a whisper that refused to stop. I slid the trash can aside and saw a wet crescent darkening the baseboard. The cabinet beneath the sink was dry, but the pipe beneath the floor must have cracked. I called a plumber, not to ask permission, just to act. He came late afternoon, his shoes tracking sawdust from the last job. "Copper's old," he said, wiping his hands on a square of cloth. "Could patch it, but won't last. Better to replace the section." I nodded. The invoice came to $187.16. I paid with my card. He offered me the receipt, and I held it like a sliver of something no one else would see. After he left, I laid it on the kitchen table and took a photo with a timestamp. Then I wrote in the corner of my planner, "Leak under kitchen wall, repaired, May 6, 2:48 p.m., paid by Claire." I didn't say anything to her that evening, not yet. She didn't ask why a stranger had been in the house. She must have seen the toolbox by the front door, smelled the faint metallic tang of solder. But she only said, "Don't forget to defrost the freezer if you're putting groceries in," as if the house had fixed itself. I opened a new folder on my laptop, House, Repairs. It had one item in it, but it was a start. The next day she saw the receipt on the table. I had placed it not to accuse but to remind. I had circled the total with a pencil, not bold, just precise. She tapped the corner of the paper. "You should have told me. I could have called someone." "I already did," I said. She paused at the sink, fingernails tapping the ceramic edge like raindrops. "Well, next time leave it. Let me take care of it." But she didn't offer to reimburse me. I knew better than to press. That's how the house worked. Gratitude implied but never spoken. Assistance assumed until it cost something. She poured herself coffee and walked out of the room. I picked up the receipt again and added it to a plastic sleeve, the kind made for school reports. I slid it into the folder behind a blank divider and labeled it Plumbing, May. It wasn't the money, not really. It was the pattern forming. The absence of acknowledgement is not neutrality, it's a withdrawal. A kind of subtraction that isn't obvious unless you're keeping score. I opened a new spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, item. Column C, cost. Column D, paid by. Column E, notes. Row 2 read 5-6, pipe repair, 187.16, Claire, leak near sink. I clicked save, then I exhaled. The leak had stopped, but something else had started. I titled the document plainly, House Expense Ledger. No need for dramatics. Just numbers, dates, and what could be verified. I formatted the columns so everything lined up. Precision helped. The header row was bold. I chose a cool gray for the cell background, neutral, non-emotional. Just like I'd learned from watching her all my life. I knew better than to let this pile up. Memory bends. Documentation doesn't. That was the phrase I wrote in cell F1. Memory bends. Documentation doesn't. Not a threat, not even a reminder, just policy. I didn't think of it as conflict. I thought of it as record-keeping. I wasn't keeping a grudge, only receipts. The folder on my desktop began to take shape. I created subfolders: utilities, maintenance, groceries, supplies. Then I opened a second tab, running totals. Underneath I typed rent, housework, unspoken agreements. I didn't fill anything in yet. That part would come later. I printed the receipt just to feel it physically in my hand. The ink was still fresh. It smelled faintly like warmed plastic. I folded it once, then slid it into the sleeve, hearing the soft shuck as it sealed. The folder now made a soft click when it closed. That was enough to feel real. I placed it in the drawer next to my bed, under my lesson plans, behind the night lotion and spare batteries, just in case. I didn't tell anyone, not friends, not colleagues. There's a kind of dignity in private endurance. Or maybe it's shame, dressed in its Sunday best. I wanted to see how long I could last. Not out of martyrdom, out of observation. Like a scientist taking notes on herself. What would happen if I didn't speak up? If I kept giving and didn't ask for anything back? Where would it end? Every home has its own ecosystem. Some thrive on warmth, others on withdrawal. Ours ran on quiet tolerance. But even quiet has a cost. It stacks up. Like humidity you don't notice until the windows sweat. I started listening more carefully. To the creak of the floorboard she always stepped over. To the click of the stove knob when she made tea, never offering me a cup. To the refrigerator hum, steady and unbothered, like the house had decided it no longer needed me to belong. I was invisible, in the softest way. Still, I wiped the counters. I refilled the paper towel roll. I replaced the batteries in the smoke detector. Silence, I found, can be weaponized, but it can also be repurposed. My silence wasn't surrender, it was a signal, a boundary without signage. And slowly I began to build my case, not to win, but to witness. The sound started again. Drip, 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 but not from the same place. This time it was the bathroom. The faucet hadn't been tightened. Each drop hit porcelain with a sharp ping, like the start of a timer I hadn't set. I stared at it for a while. Then I twisted the knob harder. The leak stopped, for now. I returned to the kitchen and sat down at the table. The chair creaked. The same way it always did, one leg slightly off balance. I made a note to tighten it. Not for her, for the record. Outside, the lawn was soaked from a recent rain. A single shoe print was pressed into the mud near the garden steps. I hadn't been out there in days. I marked the time, 6:42 a.m. Then I added to the ledger, 5/7. Faucet leak, bathroom, 0.00, Claire. Adjusted manually. I didn't count effort in dollars, but it still counted. I stared at the spreadsheet again. One line item, one unpaid cost. No recognition, but I knew what it meant. It was the first deposit into a quiet debt. Not a monetary one, but a debt of erasure. The kind of loss you don't feel until months later. When someone asks what you've contributed, and you can't find the words, only the receipts. So I kept the file open. I saved a backup on a USB drive. I emailed a copy to myself with a subject line for reference. Because someday, someone might ask why I left. And I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I'd just open the file.
I didn't plan on replacing the roof. I'd called the contractor just to get a quote. That's how it always starts. A question asked politely. A bit of research, just to be responsible. I'd noticed the shingles curling near the gutter, the black streaks like bruises stretching across the slope. The contractor was direct. It's soft near the ridge. That's water damage. You're 2 winters away from leaks in the attic. I asked for a written estimate. He gave me one on the spot, clipboard against his thigh, a pen tethered by a broken string. His handwriting was blocky and certain. Estimate 1. Full roof replacement, $7,860. Estimate 2. Patchwork repairs, $2,150. I didn't like either, so I called a second company, then a third. I created a new tab in my spreadsheet, roof quotes. I uploaded photos of the damage, highlighting the weak spots in red circles. I inserted a small caption, assessment cross-checked. No insurance claim filed. Self-funded. By the end of the week I had 3 quotes, none under $6,000. I chose the most reputable one, not the cheapest. Paid the deposit using my teacher's paycheck. It drained nearly an entire month's salary. No one knew. I didn't ask Mom. Because I already knew the answer. I told you not to take on too much. Which is what she always said after I'd already done the thing. The contractor scheduled the job for Thursday. They arrived at 8:12 a.m. I left the porch light on for them, even though it was daylight by then. Old habit. When I came home that evening, the house looked different. Not new, just clean. The shingles were a darker gray now, matte and orderly. The gutter line sat straighter, like the house had exhaled. Mom stood on the porch with her arms crossed, looking up. "You can really see the difference," she said. I waited. She kept her eyes on the roof. "It looks brighter." "It's new," I said. She nodded slowly. "Yeah." Then she turned toward me, already walking back into the house. "Supper's in the fridge." She didn't ask how much it cost, didn't offer to help, didn't say thank you. That's the thing about this kind of relationship. You're never sure if they're ignoring the sacrifice or expecting it. I stood there a moment longer, listening to the faint tick, tick, tick of the cooling metal as the sun dropped behind the trees. Then I walked inside and pulled the receipt from my bag. It still smelled faintly of tar and asphalt. I scanned the invoice and saved it as roofinstallclairepaid.pdf. Then I took a photo of the new shingles from the sidewalk and labeled it, after, May 12th, 6:44 p.m. I added it to the ledger. 5/12, roof replacement, $7,860. Claire, paid in full. See photos, contractor estimate folder. I didn't round the number. I typed all 4 digits down to the last cent. Because details matter when no one believes you later. In the notes section I added, self-initiated for property preservation. No reimbursement discussed. No shared cost offered. It looked like a line from a court document. Maybe one day it would be. I opened my running totals tab. The expenses had passed $8,000. Most of that came from small things. But the roof, it changed the scale. I knew what it meant even if she never acknowledged it. This was no longer a favor. It was an investment. In someone else's asset. Mom made a passing comment about how quiet the rain would be now. Said it like a compliment, but it wasn't addressed to me. Just to the air. She didn't ask how I found the contractor, or why I hadn't waited until fall. She just assumed it had happened, and would continue happening, without input. Like I was the house's other owner, just without a name on the deed. I wanted to tell her I'd compared structural reports, that I'd chosen Class 4 shingles for hail protection, that I'd opted out of the ridge vent because it didn't suit the existing architecture. I wanted her to know how much thought I'd put into something she lived under, but I didn't. I just nodded when she said, "You made a good choice." Then I walked into my room and updated the backup copy of the ledger on my USB drive. Under the motivation column I wrote, "Because no one else would." That's not bitterness, it's clarity. The air smelled of sun-warmed tar for 3 days. It drifted in through the window screens, clung to my laundry,
settled into my notebooks. I didn't mind it. It smelled like action, like something completed. But it also made my throat dry and my chest tight. I kept waking up thirsty. The scent reminded me of parking lots after summer rain. Warm, chemical, oddly nostalgic. I added a sticky note to the folder. Ventilation check, attic. Then I scheduled a reminder in my phone to follow up. Because no one else would. And because the house wouldn't care whether I collapsed under the weight of responsibility. It would just keep standing. That single line item in my ledger now outweighed every other cost combined. It made the rent she hadn't yet calculated feel irrelevant. Still, I didn't bring it up, not yet. I wanted to see when, or if, she'd ever mention the cost. Not the work, not the result, the price. There's a difference. The roof was new. My boundaries weren't. But they were forming, plank by plank. And under that new roof, I sat at the kitchen table, typed out a note, and folded it into my folder. Threshold crossed, no acknowledgement. My phone buzzed once, a short vibration, just enough to draw attention. No name flashed across the screen, just the preview of the message. Starting this month, you'll need to pay rent. No greeting, no explanation, no breakdown. It was from her. I stared at the message for a while. Not shocked, exactly. More like paused. The way you pause when you hear thunder in the distance, not close enough to run, but close enough to register. I set the phone down beside my coffee and folded the dish towel I'd been holding. My hands felt dry. There was a little soaked crust at the edge of my knuckle. I didn't respond immediately. I took a photo of the message instead, saved it into a new folder, rent request, June. Then I opened my ledger and added a new section. Category, rental demands. Date, 6/1. Source, text message. Message. Starting this month, you'll need to pay rent. Context. No prior discussion or documentation. I kept my phone face down the rest of the evening. That's how things shifted in our house. Not with raised voices, but with carefully timed texts, dropped like stones into a still pond. The ripples weren't immediate, but they came. She never once looked me in the eye and said the words aloud, but I heard them loud and clear. That weekend I asked her plainly, while we were both standing at the kitchen counter. She was slicing fruit, I was packing my lunch for Monday. How did you come up with the amount? She didn't stop slicing. It's just market rate. I looked up from the sandwich bag. What market? She didn't answer, just dropped a few strawberries into a Tupperware, sealed it, and placed it into the fridge. I asked again, gently this time. Could you give me a breakdown? Just so I know what I'm contributing to? Still nothing. Just that tight-lipped nod, like I was asking something absurd. She wiped her hands, tossed the paper towel into the bin, and walked away. Not no, just gone. That kind of silence feels colder than refusal. Later that night, I wrote in my notes, request made for rental terms, no itemization provided. Defers to vague market rate without location, square footage, or utility inclusion defined. It felt like I was writing legal memos to myself, but in a house like this, every sentence needed a record. Every omission needed a counterweight. I sat with the idea of rent longer than I should have. Not because I couldn't afford it, though I'd have to shift some things, but because of what it meant. When I first moved in, it was temporary, a reset. After my lease ended, and I took that job at the school across town, she'd said, "It makes sense. You're welcome here." No timeline, no conditions. Just that tone of implied generosity that always came with strings you didn't see until they pulled. I paid for groceries. I repaired the roof. I kept the house tidy and small. But now, Rent. I clicked into a rental site, not to argue but to understand. I filtered by similar square footage, private room, shared kitchen. No names, no cities, just numbers. I built a table, added a column for average utility costs. Then I built a second table next to it. Column A, contribution so far. Column B, services rendered. Column C, hours of labor, cleaning, maintenance. It wasn't petty, it was preparation. Because if she wanted to treat this like a transaction, I'd meet her on that field. With receipts, timestamps, and line items. I wasn't refusing. I was documenting. The porch steps were cold that night, even though it was late spring. The kind of cold that feels out of place, as if the season misfired. I sat with a cup of tea, lukewarm by the time I took the first sip. The porch light above me buzzed softly. It cast that same golden spill I'd come to recognize, brushing the edge of the mat like it did weeks ago. Inside, the house was quiet. The hallway light had been turned off, and her door was closed. I didn't want to argue. I didn't even want to fight. I wanted numbers. Not for revenge, for reference. A way to hold the intangible things up to the light and say, "This is what I gave. This is what you're asking." I went back inside and typed a sentence into the top of a fresh document. Proposed ledger for rent exchange and offset. Then I saved it, closed my laptop and turned off the lamp. The room sank into darkness. I woke to a reply the next morning, short, blunt. "It's not personal, Claire. You're an adult. Adults pay rent." That was it. No number still, no date, no terms. Just a principle, stated like law. I didn't respond.
Not yet. Instead, I highlighted that sentence and pasted it at the top of the ledger. Then I wrote underneath, "Without personal context, transactional clarity must follow. Requesting formalized rental terms, including itemization and dates." It wasn't an emotional note. It was a procedural step. That's how I'd decided to protect myself. Not by yelling, not by begging, by making the invisible weight legible, by putting shape to silence. That week I resolved to formalize everything. I updated the ledger to include 2 categories, in-kind contributions and rent demands pending clarification. I built a formula that calculated monthly offsets. Any improvement, repair, or cleaning task would be logged with a fair cost assigned, not inflated, just precise. The house, after all, didn't maintain itself, and her demands weren't falling into a vacuum anymore. I printed the spreadsheet, stapled the summary, slipped it into the folder labeled Claire, House Costs, June Start. And then I set a reminder. If no itemized rent by June 15th, begin offset ledger enforcement. The utility bill came on a Monday, folded into a thin white envelope I nearly tossed aside with the grocery store coupons. It looked normal, until it didn't. The total had jumped nearly 40% from the month before. I checked the kilowatt usage. Then I checked the water consumption line. Then I went outside to the meter in the early evening light, the grass still damp from the sprinkler cycle. I snapped a photo, time-stamped 6:21 p.m. Then I waited until the next morning and took another, at 6:23 a.m. The numbers barely moved, meaning the overnight draw was consistent, not faulty, which meant something else had changed. I asked her casually while we were both in the kitchen, my voice soft, neutral. "The electric bill went up a lot. Did anything get added recently?" She didn't look up from buttering her toast. "It's summer, AC probably." "But it spiked higher than normal." "Don't overanalyze," she said, smiling tightly. "It's just a bill." But it wasn't just a bill. It was an equation, and I was expected to pay part of it now. So I took another picture of the statement and added it to the ledger. June utility total, $214.79. Last month, $151.62. Variance, $63.17. No explanation provided. I started tracking the meter myself, Every Friday at noon, I walked to the side of the house with my phone in one hand and a small notebook in the other. I recorded the electric and water readings, took a photo, labeled them by date. She saw me once. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Just tracking usage," I said. "Trying to be responsible since I'm contributing now." She nodded slowly, lips pressed. "You don't need to be obsessive." "I'm not, just accurate," I smiled. She didn't. That evening I created a tab titled Utilities, Index Log. Each week had its own row with columns for usage, totals, and percentage change. No commentary, just raw numbers. Then I created a graph. The spikes were visible. I used shading to highlight the periods where the jumps occurred, always within the same 3-day stretch each month. Coincidentally, the same weekend her bridge group came over. I noted that too. Not for confrontation, for clarity. I built a second document, Utility Share Calculations. If she was going to invoke market rent, I would apply standard rental accounting, shared utilities, clear ratios. I looked up average splits for two-person households. I factored in my room size versus the total square footage. I ran it through a formula. It wasn't perfect, but it was defendable. According to my math, my utility share was 38%, not 50%. But she'd asked for half. I printed a page from the spreadsheet and left it on the counter with a sticky note. "Hi. Attached is a suggested breakdown of this month's utilities based on usage and space. Let me know your thoughts." Neutral. Professional. She didn't mention it that night. Or the next morning. But when I went to retrieve the page 2 days later, it was gone. No reply. Just absence. Still, I updated the ledger. 6/12. Utility share proposal submitted. No response. File. Utility share June proposal.pdf. There's a silence that confirms things more deeply than words ever could. When people refuse to engage with numbers, it's not because they don't understand. It's because they understand too well and don't want the math to take root. I sat at the dining table that night with the ledger open in front of me. The scent of rubber bands and file folders clung faintly to the room. That dry, office-like smell of containment. I opened a new tab, Inaction Log. 6/12. No reply to utility breakdown 6/9. No itemized rent despite request. 6/1. Rent requested via text, no follow-up. A pattern was forming. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being methodical. If I ever needed to defend myself or walk away, I wanted a record that wasn't rooted in memory or feeling, just facts. At the post office, the clerk stamped my envelope without asking what was inside. It wasn't a letter. It was a photocopy of my updated ledger, sealed and addressed to myself, documented in case the originals disappeared or were altered. It's an old trick I'd learned from a friend who worked in legal aid. Time-stamped, sealed mail can serve as proof of authorship. Inside the envelope, 12 printed pages. House repairs, utility logs, rent proposal, screenshot of text thread, annotated photo of roof installation. I dropped it into the slot and exhaled. The room smelled faintly of ink and glue. Sometimes, justice isn't loud. It's just quietly filed. When I got home, I opened the fridge to find my groceries pushed aside. A large bowl of coleslaw had taken up the top shelf. The milk I'd bought was lying on its side in the door, cap sticky. I straightened it, wiped my hand, and added to the spreadsheet 6/14, shared fridge incident, displacement. Impact, minor. Notes, behavioral pattern during tension. It wasn't about food. It was about space. And I was done pretending these moments didn't count. They did. They always had. She made lasagna for dinner. It wasn't unusual. She cooked maybe once or twice a week, usually when leftovers had run their course. I didn't expect to be invited. That had stopped a while ago.
But as I passed through the kitchen on my way to reheat my own food, she glanced at me. "Didn't know you were still home," she said. "I made enough for the bridge girls." I nodded and opened the fridge. My container of lentil soup was exactly where I left it. I took it out, trying not to let the plastic lid click too loudly against the counter. As I stirred it on the stove, she added, "Guests usually give a heads up if they'll be around at mealtimes." I turned toward her slowly. "I live here." She didn't flinch. "You know what I mean. It's just considerate." I didn't answer. She didn't need a fight, just a statement. Lodged into the air like a tack into drywall. Something small enough to overlook, sharp enough to draw blood if you leaned on it wrong. After she left the room, I washed my bowl and fork, dried them, and placed them back in my drawer. I had started keeping my things separate. 2 plates, 2 bowls, 1 set of utensils. Stacked neatly in my own cabinet, beside my vitamins and herbal teas. I didn't ask permission. She hadn't either. That night I took stock of the cleaning supplies. The sponge by the sink was fraying at the edges. I replaced it with a new one from the pack I had bought last week. One of the many small things no one seemed to notice, yet everyone used. I counted the remaining ones in the drawer. 4. I jotted it down in my phone. 616. Sponge replenishment, 5-pack. Claire. Cost, $4.87. Shared use. Then I opened the pantry. The dish soap was low. I had filled it last week. Paper towels, nearly gone.
Toilet paper, my own brand, still stocked in the hallway cabinet. I began to realize just how many invisible lines I'd drawn to avoid argument. How many spaces I carved just to feel like I belonged. The grocery receipts were easy to organize. I had a file marked household shared, Claire paid. Each entry had a total, a photo, and a highlight showing the items that weren't personal. Foil, dish soap, bleach tabs, surface cleaner, sponges. I never asked her to pay for any of it. But she never offered. The sound of the sponge dragging across the ceramic sink is one I've learned to hate. It's faint, wet, resigned. Each time I rinsed it out, I watched the suds disappear down the drain, taking something with them. I didn't know what. Maybe dignity? Maybe patience. There's a quiet humiliation in being the one who scrubs the sink you didn't clog, washes the dishes you didn't use, restocks the bin that empties without acknowledgement. I started writing these things down not to confront her, but to confirm for myself that they happened. Because over time, even I began to forget what I'd paid for. That's the danger of slow erosion. You don't notice what's missing until you stand still and try to count it. I opened the ledger. 617, grocery resupply, cleaning and shared. Total, $31.44. Paid by Claire. Notes, no reimbursement offered. I snapped a photo of the receipt, then of the items on the counter before I put them away. It wasn't about the money, it was about the math. I made dinner for myself the next night. Simple stir-fry, nothing fancy. As I plated it, I heard her walking toward the kitchen. "Oh," she said, eyeing the pan. "That smells strong." I didn't respond. She opened the fridge, pulled out her own salad container, and shut the door harder than necessary. "You know," she added, "most roommates coordinate meals. Out of courtesy. Roommate. Not daughter, not guest, not even housemate, just roommate." It wasn't the insult she thought it was. If anything, it clarified things. Roommates split costs. Roommates log expenses. Roommates track fairness. She had just aligned with my math more perfectly than she realized. I logged it. Not the comment, the moment. The smell of lemon dish soap clung to my hands long after I'd finished washing up. It mixed with the faint burn of white vinegar I'd used to scrub the stovetop. My skin felt tight and dry. I made a mental note to buy gloves, then wrote it in the grocery list tucked into my planner. I stood at the kitchen window for a while, watching the porch light flicker faintly in the reflection of the glass. It hadn't gone out, it just dimmed sometimes, unpredictably. I used to fix that sort of thing. Not anymore. She could replace the bulb, or she could let it die out. Either way, it wasn't mine to mend. I closed the curtain and added a final line to the day's ledger.
618. Emotional impact? Low-grade estrangement. Not quantifiable, still real. Then I closed the file and let the silence settle. By now, the ledger had become more than a financial document. It was a record of tiny betrayals. Not dramatic ones, just the slow kind. The kind that mold around you like a second skin until you forget you're wearing it. It tracked the cost of politeness, the price of invisibility, the tax of being well-behaved. And quietly, without ceremony, I began to shift, from documentation to preparation, from acceptance to awareness. I didn't know exactly what would happen next, but I knew I wouldn't ignore it anymore. Not the costs, not the silences, not myself. The first draft of my request wasn't right. It was too emotional. I'd written, "I want to understand what you think is fair." Then I deleted it. Fairness was too soft, too debatable. Instead, I opened a new document and typed, "For the sake of accurate record-keeping, could you please provide a rental breakdown including any utility allocations and household contributions expected?"
A written itemization will help ensure transparency moving forward.
I read it twice. No excess, no edge. Then I pasted it into an email. Subject: Rental contribution clarification. I sat with the cursor over the send button for longer than I care to admit. Because once you send something like that, you cross an invisible line. Not just the one between mother and daughter, the one between memory and evidence. I clicked send. Timestamp: 9:04 a.m. June 20th. I copied the sent message and dropped it into my ledger under a new tab. Correspondence, rental terms. Then I waited. She replied 3 hours later. It was a single line. "It's just the going market rate for a room this size." No attachment, no numbers, no mention of shared spaces, utilities, or the fact that I'd paid for the roof over this so-called room. I stared at the sentence for a long time. I could almost hear her saying it in person, lightly dismissive, like the tone she used when correcting a grocery list. I didn't reply. I printed the email and filed it behind a labeled divider. Responses, non-specific. That afternoon, I compiled local rental listings. Private room, shared kitchen, modest condition, within a 5-mile radius. I averaged the prices, removed outliers, then made a table comparing size, amenities, and shared utility arrangements. The figure she had implied, though never named, was nearly 20% higher than the local mean. I saved the document as benchmark rates logi june.pdf. Then I sent a follow-up email. Attached is a benchmark of comparable market rentals. Happy to review and align based on documented standards. Still polite, still professional, and still no answer. That week, the ceiling fan in the guest room began to click faintly, one of the blades slightly out of balance. I made a note of it in the shared maintenance file. I was starting to see the house differently, not as a home, but as a managed property. And I was no longer its caretaker. I was its auditor. I walked from room to room and cataloged everything I'd fixed or paid for since I moved in. Rusted hinges, leaking faucet, new curtain rods, paint touch-ups in the laundry room. None of it requested. All of it recorded. I added a column to the ledger. Comparable value of labor rendered. I searched online for average handyman rates, added time estimates, and assigned values conservatively. Total as of June 21st, $2,784.50. Unbilled, unacknowledged, but no longer untracked. I printed a 1-page summary of services and labeled it, Labor Offset, Claire. I didn't share it with her. Not yet. But I would. The fan above the kitchen table made a soft grinding sound that night. She hadn't noticed. Or maybe she had and chose not to. "I don't understand why you're making this so complicated," she said out of nowhere while rinsing her mug. It's just rent. I paused in the doorway. Then let's define it. She turned toward me. I didn't raise my voice. I'd like to align on the number and what it includes. If it's a transaction, it should have structure. She blinked at me, then turned back to the sink. Silence filled the room like steam. You used to be easier, she said finally. I didn't answer. I just wrote it down later. June 21st. You used to be easier equals implied discomfort with boundaries. The ceiling fan in my room started humming too. Nothing urgent, just a faint, high-pitched sound when it rotated above the second setting. I adjusted the chain, lowered the speed. Sometimes I imagined the house itself growing restless, the way a body reacts to a shift in rhythm. It had grown used to me giving without asking, fixing without filing. Now it wasn't sure what to do with me. I added a maintenance note. Then I added a line in the non-material costs tab of my ledger. 6/21. Emotional labor expended clarifying boundaries. Status: no response. The fan slowed as I typed. A strange metaphor, maybe, but fitting. June 22nd came and went without reply. No rental breakdown. No acknowledgement of the comparison chart. No discussion. I updated my ledger status summary. Rent request still unsubstantiated. All efforts at clarification documented. Then I added a quiet line to the bottom of the page. If she does not define the terms, I will. Because silence is not neutral. It is itself a form of authorship, and I had learned to write my part. My phone buzzed exactly 3 times, then went still. That was her signal. She always called like that first, 3 rings, then hang up. If I didn't return it, I'd get a message later, usually something vague. Call me when you can, or we need to talk. Sometimes she'd skip the message entirely, just leave the ringing there like a question unanswered. But I didn't call back this time. Not because I was angry, because I was documenting. I opened the ledger and logged the timestamp. 6:24, missed call, 3-ring hang-up, no voicemail. Then I highlighted the row and moved on. That day, I decided to stop asking questions. I would not follow up again on the rent breakdown. I would not send reminders about clarifying terms. I would not press for answers I already knew wouldn't come. Instead, I opened a new tab, Ledger, Capital Improvements, and I got to work. I pulled out the folders, digital and paper. One by one, I organized the photos. The old shingles curling like paper bark. The new roof laid in clean, overlapping rows. The dripping pipe, the plumber's receipt, the notes from the fan repair. I created headers for each: repair, date, cost, purpose, paid by. Then I began labeling every receipt, renaming each file with a clean, systematic format. YYYMMDD_repair type_location.pdf. Example. 2023-050/pipefix_kitchen wall.pdf. Every photo got a matching caption and date. I scanned my grocery receipts again, this time highlighting shared items. Every bottle of dish soap, every roll of paper towels, every sponge and trash bag. I added a formula to calculate cumulative cost of shared supplies. Then I created a crosstab report. Shared use supplies, not reimbursed. The total, $212.67. Small, maybe, but cumulative, and now, indisputable. She said nothing for 3 days. No reply to my emails. No comment on the file I'd printed and left near the fruit bowl. No acknowledgement of the expense summaries pinned neatly to the bulletin board. And I said nothing in return. I didn't ask if she'd seen them. I didn't follow up with another text. I simply updated the ledger. 6/26. No verbal or written response to rental documentation. Status: presumed avoidance. I wasn't angry, just done negotiating terms without paper. Each morning, I reviewed the ledger with the same steadiness as I brushed my teeth. It had become a ritual, private and controlled. Justice, I'd come to understand, doesn't shout. It calculates. That week I sorted receipts by category and compiled everything into a new PDF, neatly formatted, numbered pages, with a contents list at the front. Title: Claire Ledger. Cost Contributions to Shared Residence, updated June 26th. It was 48 pages long. I didn't send it, not yet. Instead, I saved it in 3 places: a flash drive, a cloud folder, and printed hard copy tucked beneath my pillow. It wasn't about retaliation, it was about protection. I had stopped trying to explain what I contributed. Now I was simply preparing to prove it, quietly, cleanly, without apology. In the hallway, I passed her once. She looked at me, then looked away. I noticed the light bulb in the stairwell had gone out. A week ago, I would have replaced it without thinking, but now, I kept walking. She could replace her own silence. I made a new note in the deferments tab. 6/27, stairwell bulb expired, no longer maintaining shared fixtures. Not out of pettiness, out of principle. The hallway light flickered as I turned the corner, then went dark. I sat at my desk that night and pulled up the ledger one last time before bed. All the entries were there, the costs, the photos, the patterns, the non-responses. No argument, just data. I scrolled to the bottom and added one final row. 6/27. Ready for formal offset proposal if terms remain undefined. Then I clicked Save, backed it up, closed the file. The screen went black. Outside, the house creaked gently, and I exhaled, not from exhaustion, but clarity. Because I wasn't fighting anymore. I was recording. The key didn't turn. At first, I thought I had the wrong one. Maybe I grabbed the spare. Maybe the metal had warped. I tried again. The lock gave a sharp click, then jammed. I stepped back and stared at the doorknob. The garage door had always stuck slightly, but it had never locked me out. I texted her. "Hey, I can't open the garage. Did the lock get changed?" The reply came 6 minutes later. "Yes, for security. I'll give you the new one when I get home." There was no warning, no heads up, no courtesy, just a changed lock, and my gardening tools, spare boxes, and project materials now locked behind it. I stood on the driveway for a long moment. Then I took a photo of the lock, time-stamped it, and saved it under a new folder. Access revoked, June 29th. Then I opened my ledger and typed, 6/29, garage lock changed without notice, access restricted, items withheld inside. Noted, file, calm. But my hands trembled slightly as I put the phone down. I called a locksmith the next morning, not to undo what she'd done, but to ensure that I had documented every step of my response. The man arrived just after noon. He wore a baseball cap and didn't ask many questions. I asked him to inspect the lock and confirm the change was recent. He did. "It's new hardware," he said, holding up the remove cylinder. "Installing maybe 2 or 3 days ago." "Can you put it back the way it was?" I asked. "I can replace it with something functionally identical. You want a copy of the invoice?" "Yes, and a photo of the old cylinder, please." He blinked, then nodded. Smart. When he left, I scanned the invoice and uploaded it to the ledger. 6:30. Locksmith. Garage access restored. Cost, $93. Paid by Claire. Supporting photo. Cylinder stamped with date code. I added one more note. Temporary interference with access to stored property. Repaired without confrontation. That was the tone now. Not confrontation, correction. I walked into the garage that evening like I was walking into a memory someone tried to delete. My boxes were still there. labeled in neat handwriting. Books, winter clothes, lesson materials. One of them had been moved, not opened, but shifted a few inches from where I'd placed it. That was enough. I took a photo of the contents, time-stamped it again, and sealed the box with new tape. Then I walked through the space and cataloged every item I'd stored, 32 in total, each with value, some sentimental, some functional. I created a new section in the ledger, storage value, access interference. Then I logged each item with a photo, estimated value, and purpose, not to assign blame, to establish boundaries. The garage was part of the house, and I had been treated like a trespasser. That night, I sat in the living room while she microwaved her dinner. The air smelled of reheated pasta and silence. She didn't mention the locksmith. She didn't offer the new key she promised. Instead, she hummed softly, some old song from her childhood, like nothing had changed. I waited, and when she said nothing, I said nothing in return, but I logged it. 6:30. No verbal acknowledgement of lockout, no apology, no replacement key offered. Silence again, but this time I didn't fill it with discomfort. I filled it with documentation. The metal of the old lock cylinder felt cool in my hand when I held it before tossing it into the envelope. I mailed it to myself. Proof of hardware, dated by a third party. Inside the envelope, photograph of the installed lock, invoice from locksmith, cylinder in labeled bag postmarked, sealed, ready. That's how you prepare for being erased, by mailing yourself the evidence before they pretend it never happened. I updated the ledger's master summary tab. June incidents. Rent request, no itemization. Utility spikes, no discussion. Lockout, no notice. Items withheld, no apology. Then I created a new folder, Boundary Events, and underneath it, a quiet line. Let this be the last time I ask for permission to access what I've already paid for. Because silence is not submission, it is a strategy. The porch light blinked twice, then steadied into a weak hum. It used to shine clean and even, its amber pool warming the threshold. I'd replaced that bulb once, months ago, on a quiet afternoon with no fanfare. Wiped the glass, tightened the screws. But now I watched it from the window and did nothing. It flickered again, brief, like a shiver, then resumed its dull glow. I knew what it meant. The voltage was fluctuating, a poor connection. Probably the base wiring loosening inside the housing. But I didn't reach for a ladder. I didn't check the bulb. I just made a note in the ledger. 7-2. Porch light flickering. Not repaired. Status. Observed only. No intervention. I closed the blinds. Not out of defiance, out of decision. She could call someone, or ignore it, or live beneath its stutter, but I wouldn't fix it. Not anymore. The next morning she noticed. I think the porch light's acting up again, she said over coffee. I nodded. Probably, I replied. She waited for something more, an offer, a movement, a tool belt, but I sipped my tea. She looked over her glasses. You fixed it last time. That was before. Before what? I didn't answer. Instead, I folded the laundry that had been drying in the sunroom. My shirts, my towels, my order. She exhaled, slow and audible, and turned back to her newspaper. The bulb flickered again through the kitchen window. This time it stayed dim. That was fine. It wasn't mine to brighten. That afternoon, I took a photo of the porch light from the driveway. Dim, uneven, half-lit. I labeled the image, porchlight_20230702702_flickr.jpg. Then I opened the ledger, created a subfolder under Deferred Maintenance and filed it there with a brief note. Symbolic neglect, previously resolved by occupant, now assigned to homeowner. The language was sterile by design. I'd learned not to lace my records with feeling. Let the facts sit cold. They'd speak louder that way. Still, when I closed the laptop, I lingered at the screen. The image of the dim porch light reflected faintly against the glass, a ghost of warmth, receding. That evening I passed her in the hall. She was balancing a stack of mail, sorting bills from catalogs when she said, "I'm surprised you're letting it blink like that. Thought you were the fixer." I stopped. I didn't raise my voice, didn't blink. Fixing things doesn't make them mine. She turned toward me, blinking. "That light's part of the house," I added. "And this house has an owner." She said nothing, just turned back to the pile of envelopes, as if something in her hands suddenly needed organizing. I walked away, the bulb's faint pulse still visible through the front window. Flicker, pause, flicker, then darkness. I couldn't sleep that night. Not from worry, from clarity. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, counting the quiet seconds between creaks in the beams. The fan turned above me, rhythmic and low. Out the window, the porch light dimmed again, struggling to stay on. It cast a crooked triangle on the steps, like a whisper interrupted. I watched it fail in silence and didn't move. This was the moment I knew I would never again repair something that refused to repair me. The thought wasn't angry, it was still. I added a line to the ledger under a new section titled Emotional Boundary Notes. 7-2. Decline to repair porch light. First withheld maintenance as intentional boundary. Then I turned off my bedside lamp and let the house sit in its own quiet stutter. The next morning, she tapped the bulb casing with the back of a broom. I watched through the window as she squinted up at it, broomstick angled like a question. It blinked once, then nothing. She lowered the handle, walked back inside, and closed the door. That was it. No ladder, no call, no fix. Later that afternoon, I updated the ledger. Porch light failure. Not escalated. No external maintenance arranged. Status, neglected. Then I added a final note for the day. Ownership assumed where boundaries are weak. Ownership withheld where they are clear. The light above the steps stayed out that night, and for the first time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like distance. I sent her a preview, not the full file, just a one-page summary. Itemized, calm, titled clearly, Preliminary Offset Ledger, Claire's Contributions to Property as of July 3rd. It included 6 major entries: roof, plumbing, utility index, shared supplies, maintenance labor, and cleaning contributions. I attached it to an email at 7:58 a.m. and wrote, "This is a preliminary summary of contributions for offset consideration. Full documentation available upon request. Happy to discuss calmly and in writing." Then I hit send and waited. The silence lasted all day. She said nothing over breakfast, nothing over dinner. The only response came 26 hours later, a single-line reply. "Rent is still due on the 1st. Please send payment as expected." No acknowledgement of the document, no comment on the numbers, no disagreement. Just dismissal. I read the reply 3 times, then opened a new tab in the ledger titled Communication Log, Escalated Phase. Entry 7/4. Ledger Summary Sent, 1-page PDF. 7/5. Response received. No engagement with content. Rent reasserted. No itemization. Under tone, I wrote, Passive deflection. No evidence of review. Under next action, I typed, Proceed with written-only communication. No verbal follow-ups.
I printed the email exchange and filed it in a labeled folder, Ledger Phase, Sent and Ignored.
It wasn't personal. It was procedural now. That's what happens when fairness becomes a footnote. You stop seeking resolution and begin building your case. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I placed the one-page ledger on the dining table while she was out, face up, neatly centered, just in case she hadn't actually opened the email. I added a post-it, available to discuss in writing. My door is open, my voice is quiet. By evening, the paper was gone. No mention of it, no text, no note. I checked the trash bin, nothing. Checked the counter pile, nothing. I opened the ledger again and updated the status. Document removed from table, 7:05 p.m. No response as of 7/6/10:12 a.m. Assumed reviewed and disregarded. I highlighted the row. The spreadsheet felt heavier that day, or maybe I did. She asked, "Did you get my email?" Her tone was casual, a shrug tucked into a question. I nodded. "Yes." "And?" "I've logged your response." That stopped her. "Logged?" I met her eyes. "I'm tracking all formal exchanges now, just to be clear for both of us." She didn't speak, so I added, "You didn't comment on any of the figures." She crossed her arms. "I didn't think they were relevant." "They are," I said quietly. "They reflect what I've paid toward maintaining this place. This place is mine, and I've invested in it." Silence. Not the passive kind, the cornered kind. I didn't press. I just wrote it down later. 7/6, verbal exchange. Owner claim asserted. Tenant investment noted. No dispute resolution offered. The next morning, I printed a second copy of the one-page ledger and placed it in a sealed envelope. No note this time. Just her name written across the front in black ink. I left it beside the toaster. When I returned, it was gone again. Still no response. I didn't expect one. I filed a new entry. 7/7. Physical copy delivered. Removed without comment. No email follow-up. Then I closed the file and walked out onto the back porch. The wind moved through the trees. A branch creaked against the roof. New sound, possibly damage. I didn't check it. I just made a note. Roof creak detected. No inspection initiated. The ledger had become a living document, and I had become its author. That evening, I replied to her email, brief, precise. Acknowledged. As stated, I will not submit payment until ledger items are reviewed and offset discussion is opened in writing. Attached again for convenience. I included the same one-page PDF, then added, "Going forward, I request that all communication regarding financial matters be conducted via email." Click. Sent. No apology, no escalation, just order. Later, I logged the email and printed a fresh copy for my folder. As I filed it, I whispered aloud, half prayer, half affirmation. I don't need permission to be thorough. The printer released the final page with a soft whir, followed by the faint warmth of fresh toner in the air. I let the last sheet settle in the tray before collecting the stack. 53 pages, printed front and back, collated, and corner-stapled into 3 equal sets. Each had a cover sheet labeled Claire Hart, Contribution Ledger and Offset Statement. Property, redacted. Period. April 1st, the July 8th. The pages were clean, margins even, section headings underlined, photographic evidence inserted in line, all with captions and timestamps. Roof repairs, plumbing invoices, utility tracking, shared supply purchases, maintenance records, unreimbursed expenses, all presented without commentary. Just figures, dates, proof. I added proof. I added a table of contents and numbered each page in the footer. Then I placed each set in a transparent binder sleeve. 3 copies. 1 for her, 1 for me, and 1 for safekeeping. I exhaled. Not relief, but finality. This was no longer a record. It was a declaration. I drafted a short cover note.
Attached is the complete ledger of all contributions made to the shared residence during my occupancy. As discussed, this document outlines proposed offsets to any rental payments claimed. Please review. I am open to written discussion. Claire. No flourish. No defense. I slid the note into the front cover of the binder, then sealed the envelope and left it on the dining table, centered, weighted with a smooth river stone from the porch planter. She walked past it that morning without touching it. Later, I added a log entry. 7/8. Full ledger binder delivered. No acknowledgement. Document remains unopened as of 6:52 p.m. Still, I didn't follow up. She had everything she needed, and so did I. I named the PDF master file Rent-Off Ledger Full Claire Hart 2023 Q2.pdf. Then saved it in 4 places: my desktop, a flash drive, my secure cloud folder, a Gmail draft to myself with no recipient. I backed up the image folder separately: photos of repairs, receipts, shared item stacks, meter readings. Each image was labeled with EXIF data still intact. I'd even used a watermark plugin to embed my name and the date in the lower corner of every file. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. I scrolled through the document one final time and added a timestamp on the last page, finalized, July 8, 8:12 p.m. Prepared by Claire Hart. Then I closed the file and turned off the light. I walked into the hallway. The house was quiet, as it always was on these nights. Right after I put something important down and she refused to touch it. But the silence had shifted. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was sterile, like a waiting room. I passed the porch and noticed the bulb still out. No flicker, no glow, just dark glass above the steps. She hadn't replaced it. I smiled faintly, and didn't feel sad. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer where I kept spare batteries and printer ink. I slipped in a flash drive labeled Ledger plus supporting files. Then I taped it shut. Labeled the envelope, "In case of dispute, do not discard." I slid it behind my lesson plan folders and left the drawer open. Just slightly. The folder had weight in my hands. I stood at the post office counter with it sealed, labeled, and addressed to her full name. I chose certified mail. The clerk asked, "Would you like return receipt service?" "Yes," I said, "with signature." She peeled the green sticker and placed it carefully on the front. The smell of ink and adhesive lingered as I paid. I left the counter with the receipt in hand. Back in the car, I placed it in the glove box. Then I wrote in the Notes app, 7/9, dossier mailed, certified with receipt requested. Subject, contribution ledger and offset terms. Status, pending delivery. Not dramatic, just factual, just done. That night, I poured tea and sat by the window. The porch light still hadn't been fixed. The house looked smaller somehow, like it had pulled into itself. Inside, everything was in order. Files backed up, envelope sent, voice still calm. The only sound was the clink of my spoon against the porcelain mug. I opened my journal, not the ledger, the real one, and wrote, "I've done everything I could with dignity. What comes next is hers." Then I closed the cover and let the dark settle outside. The first voicemail came the evening after the certified letter was marked as delivered. I let it ring. I'd already decided I wouldn't answer calls without written notice. It wasn't a performance, it was a boundary. She called 3 times in a row. I watched the screen light up, then go dark. Then again. Again. The final call rang until it hit voicemail. Later, I tapped the message.
Hi, Claire. I don't know what this packet is supposed to be. You could have just talked to me. This feels unnecessary. Anyway, call me back. We can work it out. It's not that serious. Her voice was soft but clipped, edges masked and calm. I replayed it twice.
Then, save the file and transcribe the message into the ledger. 7-Eleven. Voicemail received. No specifics acknowledged. Tone. Minimizing. No offer to engage with figures. I exported the voicemail file, renamed it, and added it to the folder, audio logs, indirect responses. Then I turned my phone to silent and placed it face down. The second voicemail came the next morning. This time, the tone was different. I just feel like you're treating me like a stranger, like I'm some landlord. That's not what this is. And these documents, Claire, it's too much. Why can't we just talk like we used to? I took a breath, paused, then transcribed. 7:12, voicemail 2. Emotional appeal. No reference to numbers. Framing conversation as betrayal of relationship rather than resolution of facts. There was a long silence at the end of the message, as if she wanted me to fill it, but I didn't. Instead, I replied via email. Received your voicemail. For clarity and record, I am maintaining written correspondence only regarding all financial and occupancy matters. Let me know if you'd like to reply to the document in writing. Click. Sent. No apology, no elaboration. Just boundary. That evening, I printed the voicemail transcripts and attached them to the back of the ledger, labeled with delivery times and duration. I added a brief summary page. Verbal messages received after certified ledger delivery. Attempted to reframe discussion through emotion, not data. No line item engagement to date. Subject has declined written response. I read it once, then filed it into the main binder. The facts were clear. The absence of her engagement with specifics was becoming its own kind of evidence. Sometimes, avoidance leaves fingerprints, too. She left a note by the coffee pot the next morning. Can we just hit reset? Let's talk over dinner tonight. I read it, folded it, filed it. No signature, no mention of the ledger, no acceptance of any term, just erasure. Disguised as peace. I didn't respond. At dinner, I ate alone. She stayed in her room. When she passed me later in the hall, she said nothing. Neither did I. Instead, I made an entry. 7:13. Handwritten note left. Informal. Avoids engagement with facts. Attempt to bypass documented terms. Even the blank spaces told a story. That week, I bought a small external drive. Not because I needed more space, because I needed separation. I copied everything from the case folder into it. Audio, PDFs, scans, correspondence, receipts and transcriptions. I labeled the drive Claire Ledger Master Baguck Up 07-2023. I slipped it into the lining of my suitcase, the one I kept packed, just in case. Then I logged one final note for the night. 7:13. Complete digital archive now exists in portable form, all evidence secured. Status, prepared. Not paranoid, just organized. I knew where this might go, and I knew I wouldn't meet it unarmed. The next voicemail came on a Sunday. She didn't leave a message this time. Just let the phone ring 4 times, then hung up. I logged the call time. No transcript, no audio file, just 7:16. Missed call. No message, no response to documents. Ledger remains uncontested. Then I stared at the screen for a long while, watching the missed call notification fade. This wasn't silence anymore. It was strategy, and I had mine. She agreed to meet. Not over dinner, not in the kitchen. I suggested the living room, mid-morning, neutral territory, natural light. She didn't object. I arrived early, set a binder down on the coffee table beside a ceramic coaster. 1 copy only. I opened it halfway and laid my pen across the crease. She walked in wearing house slippers, still drying her hands from something in the sink.
This is about the ledger? She asked. Yes. She sat, not close, not far. I'd like to walk you through the documentation, I said, calm. Not to accuse, just to establish clarity. Her eyes flicked to the binder. I flipped to the first section. Capital expenses. Roof, plumbing, materials, receipts. Then to the second. Ongoing contributions. Utilities, supplies, labor. Then to offset summary. A clean grid. What she claimed I owed, what I had already paid. The delta between them. No voice raised, no names called. Just lines, numbers, and quiet air. She said little at first, mostly just turned pages. Her finger paused over one item. $312 for shared cleaning supplies over 3 months. This feels inflated. It's based on receipts, highlighted for shared use items only. I can email the originals again. She didn't answer. At the next page, she pointed again. What's this for? Faucet repair, May 6th, paid in full. Contractor note attached. She blinked. I kept my tone flat. None of these numbers are speculative, they're all sourced. She flipped to the final page, proposed offset total. The number in bold at the bottom, lower than what she'd expected, higher than she was willing to admit. She leaned back. You've really been keeping track. I've been contributing. The tracking came after. We sat in that for a long beat. She picked up the binder again, slower now. Did you talk to anyone about this? An attorney, briefly, for formatting guidance, not for escalation. Her eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but calculation. This looks legal. It's just organized. She ran her thumb along the page edge, then she closed the binder. I don't like feeling accused in my own home. I'm not accusing you. I'm protecting my part in it. She didn't argue with that. I pulled a printed copy of the one-page offset summary from my folder. This outlines my proposal, I said, sliding it across the table. I'm willing to waive any overage if we can agree to neutralize the balance. No payment from you, no rent from me. She stared at it, unmoving. It was the cleanest deal I could offer. I didn't expect a yes. I expected a pause. And I got one. She tapped the paper once, then looked out the window. Feels cold. It's factual, she nodded. Once, then again. I need time. I'll give you 72 hours, written reply only. That snapped her attention back. Why written? For record keeping. Her mouth twitched. You've always liked your paper trails. Because memory bends, documentation doesn't. The room went still. Then she stood. Fine, she said. 3 days. I noted the time, 10:14 a.m. Then I packed the binder and left the summary on the table. Behind me, the porch light still hadn't been replaced. The house smelled faintly of strong coffee and lemon polish. Leftover effort for a meeting she hadn't wanted but couldn't dismiss. In my room, I opened the negotiation log tab and entered 7:17. Ledger presented in person. Offer made. Mutual offset equals $0. Terms: 72-hour response, written only. Witness: none. Status: pending. Then I added a sensory note. Atmosphere: tense, not hostile. Deflection attempted. No escalation. This wasn't about winning, it was about concluding. I filed the updated summary sheet into the master folder, backed it up, again, just in case. That evening I passed through the hallway. The house felt different. Not changed, but thinned. Like a stage set after the audience leaves. Lighting cooled, props left mid-scene. I didn't check if she was in her room. I didn't wait for her to say something. Instead, I poured tea, turned off my phone, and stared out the window. Across the dark lawn, the porch was barely visible, still missing its light. I wrote one line in my journal. Presented everything. If she doesn't respond, the silence will. And then I closed it. Not the story, just the chapter. The rain started late. A soft tapping at first, small beads against the window screen, then heavier drops on the roof. The gutters, recently cleaned, hummed as they carried the water down. I stood by the kitchen sink, watching the backyard darken into a wet blur. That's when it happened.
The porch light flickered once, then blinked erratically, like a stuttering breath, before going out entirely. Not burned out, just overwhelmed. I didn't move, didn't reach for the switch. Instead, I turned to the hallway and retrieved the folder labeled Roof. Before/after. Inside 2 photographs. One taken in April, the original shingles warped, edges curled like dried leaves. One taken in May. The new slate gray shingles perfectly aligned, dry and firm. I placed both photos side by side on the table. Then I opened the Contribution Delta tab. Line 67. Net offset after all documented contributions. $2,431.88. Negative balance reflects overpayment by occupant, Claire. I double-check the formulas. No error, no exaggeration, just numbers. Rain tapped louder on the glass. I printed the updated balance summary and placed it in a clean folder. Then I attached a cover note. As of 7/19, all reviewed contributions have been calculated. Based on ledger totals and presented terms, current balance reflects overpayment in the amount of $2,431.88. Kindly confirm acknowledgement. Written response still preferred. No threat, no demand, just math. I walked to the hallway and placed the folder on the console table beside the keys. Visible, plain, undeniable. Then I added a line to my ledger. 7/19. Finalized offset submitted. Net due, to Claire. Status. Awaiting written acknowledgement. I didn't hope, I recorded. I checked the porch light again after dinner. It was still dark. Rain had eased into mist, but the sky remained low and gray. Water clung to the railing, trembling under the occasional gust. I stood at the threshold and stared up at the bulb, still intact, still refusing to shine. The light that once flickered as I quietly repaired the world around her had gone out. And I didn't replace it. Not out of pride, out of understanding. I stepped back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar, and made a final note in the motif log tab of the ledger. 7/19. Porch light flickered. Failed in rain. Symbolic failure of unacknowledged labor. Micro motif. Motif shifts tone, from service to clarity. Then I closed the file. She didn't mention the folder. Not the next morning, or the one after. It stayed on the console for 2 full days. Each time I passed, I saw it untouched, still aligned to the edge, still sealed. On the 3rd day, it was gone. No note, no reply. But the email came later that afternoon. I've reviewed the materials. We clearly see this situation differently. I don't agree with the amount, but I'm not interested in prolonging tension. Let's consider the balance settled. I won't pursue rent, you don't pursue reimbursement. I read it twice, then again, no admission, but a retreat, a quiet fold. I printed the email and filed it under final correspondence, informal closure. I sat with the email for a while, then opened my journal and wrote, "Justice doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it just looks like the door closing without noise." I poured tea, watched the steam lift. Outside, the porch remained dark. I didn't turn the light on. I didn't bring it up. I had nothing more to prove, just things to finish. In the ledger, I wrote, 7/21, email received, implied resolution, no legal dispute initiated, status, closed by passive consent. Then I added a final row to the balance sheet, final adjusted balance, $0, 0, rationale, informal agreement to drop claims on both sides. I bolded the cell, saved, and backed up the file. That night, rain returned in quiet sheets. I opened the front door briefly and stood under the awning. The porch light, cold and lifeless above me, no longer felt like a failure.
It felt like a line drawn clean across where care used to be, and I didn't mourn it. I stepped back inside, closed the door, turned the lock, then added one final line to the symbolic ledger tab, 721, light left unchanged. Meaning, I've stopped fixing what never fixed me. I didn't call a lawyer to fight, I called to verify.
The woman on the other end of the line had a voice like a sealed envelope, measured, neutral. She specialized in property law and tenant contributions. I found her name through a legal clinic site, buried in a PDF titled, "When Family Isn't Just Family." I emailed a summary in advance, no drama, just documents. She called me back 2 days later. We spoke for 26 minutes. After I explained, she said, "You've documented clearly, that helps." Do the repairs qualify? If they were essential to function or habitability, yes. Especially if not reimbursed. And shared expenses? Trackable contributions, groceries, utilities, materials, those can factor in. The key is consistency. You've got that. I could feel my body relaxing as she spoke. Not because I needed her to take sides, because I needed someone outside the house to say, "This isn't just in your head." She reviewed my ledger. She called it thorough. That word stayed with me. She advised one next step. If you want resolution without litigation, draft a formal demand letter, calm, precise. Not a threat, just a clear articulation of reimbursement terms or offset closure. I'm not looking to escalate, then don't, but frame it like you could. I thanked her and took detailed notes. After the call, I opened a blank document. Claire Hart, demand for reimbursement/offset settlement addressed to, redacted, date, July 23rd. I inserted the ledger totals, linked evidence exhibits, and wrote a concise 3-paragraph explanation of claims. I chose my words carefully. Request for resolution, not claim, documented contributions, not owed. Final opportunity for informal closure, not or else. Tone matters, especially when you aren't yelling. I reviewed the letter 3 times. Then asked a colleague at work, quietly, privately, if she could glance over it. She used to work in administrative law before becoming a librarian. She read it at lunch and handed it back with a nod.
This is the clearest letter I've ever seen from someone not billing hourly. I smiled. She looked at me. You're not trying to win, are you? No, I said. Just trying to end things correctly. Then this will do it. I saved the letter as PDF, then added it to a new folder. Demand letter package final. Includes ledger summary, supporting evidence, timeline log, previous communications. The folder had everything. Because I had everything. The keyboard clicked beneath my fingers as I typed the final timestamp at the bottom of the document. Composed. July 23rd, 9:04 p.m. Claire Hart, occupant contributor. I printed 1 copy for mailing, 1 for personal file, and a 3rd in case I needed to bring it anywhere physically. Then I wrote a short email. Attached is my formal offset demand based on contributions to the shared residence. Please review and respond in writing by July 28th. After that, I'll consider the matter closed or proceed as necessary. No threat. No plea. Just terms. I hit send. Then I exhaled. Not from exhaustion. From authority. The house was quiet that night. She didn't knock. Didn't speak. She must have seen the envelope on the table. The same clear folder. The same calm label. I didn't wait for her to touch it. Instead, I added a log entry. 7/23rd. Demand letter delivered, digital plus physical. Deadline for response 7/28th. Status: awaiting acknowledgement. Then I walked outside with my tea. It was humid. The breeze had stilled. The porch light socket still hung there, empty. A metal mouth half open to the night. I stared up at it without feeling. Then I walked back in. The door clicked shut behind me. Later, I wrapped the flash drive in parchment and sealed it in a labeled envelope. Claire. Full evidence ledger, legal copy. I placed it inside a fire-safe box under my bed beside my teaching credentials and passport. Not because I expected a battle, but because I respected my own labor enough to protect it. In my journal,
I wrote, "I've made my request. I've kept my record. The rest is her decision. I will not remind her again." I closed the book and turned out the light. Outside, the porch remained dark, but I didn't. She broke the silence at 7:42 a.m. I was in the kitchen, pouring oats into a saucepan when I heard her voice from the hallway. "You are so ungrateful," she said, not loud but sharp. I stirred the oats once, then turned down the heat. She was standing at the threshold, arms folded over her sweater, like she'd been waiting all morning to deliver the line. "I housed you," she continued, "fed you. And this is how you repay me? With folders and emails like I'm some kind of slumlord?" I didn't speak. She stepped closer. "You used to be generous, now you're just cold." I finally looked up. "And you used to listen," I said. "Now you just accuse." She flinched. The silence between us swelled again, but this time it had teeth. I set the spoon down gently, wiped my hands, and walked past her without a word. My heart was steady. My steps were not. I typed a response the way I'd learned to in professional settings. Calm, clean, free of defense. "I acknowledge your frustration. My intent was never to diminish your generosity, only to document mine. Let me know if you'd like to continue addressing the offset proposal in writing." I didn't send it immediately. Instead, I saved it as a draft and sat at the window with my tea. Her words echoed faintly in my head. "You are so ungrateful." But what is gratitude when it's demanded? When it becomes a currency, constantly exchanged for silence? I opened the self-reflection tab in my journal, typed 7:24, accused of ingratitude. Question: am I seeking justice or acknowledgement? Reminder: they are not always the same. Then I closed the laptop and let the question stay unanswered for now. That afternoon, I finalized the updated one-page summary. The offset figure remained unchanged, but I added a short clarification at the top. "This statement is not an accusation, it is an accounting." I printed it, signed the bottom, and placed it on her bedroom door in a neutral envelope. Then I returned to my room and sat with the hum of the ceiling fan above me, steady and low. I was no longer trying to win her over, just trying to remain intact. She didn't respond that day. No voice, no knock, no message. Just a closed door. But later that night I heard her vacuuming, then running the garbage disposal longer than usual. Tasks with noise built into them, tasks that could carry whatever she wouldn't say. I made a note. 7/24, nonverbal activity increase. Evidence of avoidance behavior. No engagement with ledger. No written reply. Then I turned to the other side of the page and wrote, "I do not exist to absorb someone else's discomfort with boundaries." The word steadied me more than I expected. My throat was dry the next morning. From the air or the effort, I wasn't sure. I drank 2 full glasses of water before checking the hallway. The envelope was gone. Still no message. But the change was small and deliberate. Her shoes had been moved, lined up neatly instead of scattered. A towel hung properly in the bathroom for the first time in weeks. Not peace, not apology, just a shift. Sometimes power doesn't announce itself, it reorders the house. I opened the ledger and added, 7/25, behavioral shift observed. No written acknowledgement. Folder removed. Status, soft compliance or silent resistance. Still, I wasn't here for her changes, I was here for mine. That evening I boiled water for tea and sat at the dining table with nothing but the quiet in my hands. No light outside the window. The porch was still dark. I stared into the dark glass and saw my own reflection looking back. Calm, unsmiling, whole. Then I opened my journal and wrote, "I do not need her agreement to justify what I did. I only need my own clarity." And with that, I knew, whether she replied or not, Whether she apologized or didn't, the math remained. The work had been done. The record had been kept. And I had stayed honest, even when she didn't. I started waking earlier, not from anxiety, but because the house was quieter before sunrise, and I wanted to hear what silence actually sounded like, not just what it covered. I made tea, swept the floor, opened the windows wide. Her door remained shut, but I didn't knock, not anymore. There was no more negotiation in me, no more shaping of words for someone who treated interpretation like warfare. I began to think less about her response and more about my own exit. That's when I made the list, not of grievances, of logistics. Close out shared accounts. Remove my name from the mailing address. Check lease clauses. Verify month-to-month status. Storage unit cost comparison. Hourly rate for moving help. The folder had become less about proving a point and more about designing a path. A future not built on retribution, but release. On Thursday, I received a message from my aunt. Simple and unexpected. Your mom says you've turned cold. I told her maybe you're just tired of being the only one who keeps the peace. I stared at that for a long time, then replied, "Thank you. I'm not angry. I'm just done carrying it." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her message wasn't permission. It was recognition, and maybe that was enough. I closed the thread, then opened a new document, titled it, Next Address Options. A list began forming. Towns with quiet libraries, a laundromat within walking distance, grocery stores that didn't play music too loud. There was no deadline, but the intention had been declared, and that was the first step out. That night, the microwave light flickered while I reheated soup. I stood in front of it, watching the shadows pulse across the kitchen floor. It was absurd in a way, how one small appliance could feel like an omen.
But that's what you start to notice when you've run out of emotional ground to cover. The objects speak louder than the people. The microwave light blinked off entirely. And I laughed. Quietly, but genuinely. Something about it, this petty house refusing to function all at once, made me feel less burdened. I unscrewed the bulb and tossed it into the trash. Then I ate standing up, letting the warm broth fill the hollow in my chest I hadn't realized was there. I didn't think about what she was doing behind her closed door. I didn't care. The drama had dissolved. All that remained was the next clear, factual step. I emailed the landlord the following morning. Subject line: Notice of intent to vacate. Not a final date, just an alert. A pre-move whisper. I reread it twice before clicking send. No ceremony, no crescendo, just action. She didn't come out of her room until mid-afternoon. By then, I was already packing the first drawer, scarves, receipts, coins from old vending machines. She paused at my doorway but said nothing. I didn't look up, didn't invite commentary. She lingered for a beat, then left. I folded a scarf and wrote quietly in the margin of the moving box, "Do not take what wasn't freely given." It wasn't bitterness, it was just a note to self. That weekend, I visited an open house in a modest duplex 4 blocks from the public library. The kitchen was small but clean. No shared walls with anyone except a retired couple on the other side. A porch light that worked. A driveway shaded by an elm. The landlord said I could take my time to decide. I didn't rush. But when I stood in the empty living room, I noticed something strange. My breathing changed. Deeper, steadier. As if the air finally had room for me. I took a photo, not for her, not for proof, but for myself. I set it as my phone background that night. It wasn't home yet, but it was possibility. Back at the old house, I passed by the hallway mirror, the one she always used to adjust her scarf in, the one I used to avoid,
Now I stopped, looked at myself fully. No dramatic expression, no hollowed-out eyes. Just a woman with a folded lease in her bag, and a calendar marked with dates no one else controlled. I didn't feel triumphant, just quiet, clear. I opened the file on my computer one last time, the one labeled Rent Receipts, and renamed it Closed. Then I moved it out of my Documents folder and into an external drive. Not deleted, just archived. Sometimes, peace is just paperwork properly filed. She noticed the suitcase by the door on Tuesday. It wasn't packed yet, just opened, unzipped, quietly declaring intent. She passed it twice before finally saying, "You're going somewhere?" I didn't look up from the drawer I was sorting. Eventually. A pause, then a scoff. I guess I should have known. You always liked running away when things got hard. I let the comment float, didn't swat it down, didn't inflate it, just folded a sweater. You know what's hard? I said gently. Staying in a place where someone thinks you owe them your silence. She flinched, but it passed quickly, like she'd trained herself not to show bruises. Well, don't expect me to chase after you, she said. I closed the drawer. I'm not expecting anything anymore. Later that night, I found one of her old shopping lists tucked inside the kitchen recipe book. The handwriting was still neat, before the days she started using voice-to-text and barking commands to her phone. Half and half, tuna cans, dish soap, Claire's almond milk, trash bags. My name, my milk, my presence acknowledged in a list of necessities. Strange how something so domestic could break your heart. I tore the page out, not as a keepsake, just to remove it. Some traces were allowed to fade. Not everything had to be remembered to be released. The next morning, I stood by the window and watched her reverse out of the driveway. She didn't wave. I didn't expect her to. As her car disappeared down the road, I exhaled slowly, Then walked to the kitchen and made coffee with the last scoop in the jar. No shared silence. No tension thick enough to slice. Just morning light and an empty hallway. I sat at the table and opened my notebook. Wrote, "There is no ceremony for letting go, only practice." I repeated the sentence, then again, until it felt real, until it felt mine. She returned that evening with groceries, dropped the bags on the counter with more force than necessary. "I got your milk," she said, unprompted. "I won't need it," I replied. She turned, eyes narrowing. "So you really think you're better than me now?" I kept my tone steady. "No, I just don't think we belong in the same kind of life anymore." She stood there, holding a can of soup like it was a threat. "I gave you everything. Don't forget that." I met her gaze. "You gave me the tools. I'm just using them now." She didn't reply, just put the soup down and left the room. That night I emailed the woman who showed me the duplex, told her I'd like to move in the 1st of next month. She responded within the hour. "Lease is ready whenever you are, just say the word." I stared at that line. Not just the offer, but the clarity in it. No manipulation, no loaded words. Just a simple invitation to start fresh. I clicked reply, said yes, attached the digital signature. When I closed the laptop, the house felt heavier. But I didn't. I felt like someone who had just taken off a coat she no longer needed. That weekend, I boxed up the last shelf. Books I had carried from apartment to apartment. Not because they were valuable, but because they felt like mine. She hovered nearby, arms crossed. "You'll regret this," she said, not looking at me. I smiled. "Maybe, but it won't stop me." She didn't answer. Just walked away like she was the one being left behind by a train she never planned to board. I labeled the final box, personal, for the new shelf. Then I sat down and sipped my tea. No more folders, no more proof. Just space. And the quiet joy of choosing it. She didn't ask when I'd leave, but she started baking again. I found lemon bars cooling on the counter one morning, their powdered sugar drifting like fresh snow. She'd arranged them in perfect rows. No note, no offer. But she left them out like a peace flag, or a final argument. I didn't touch them, just stood there, breathing in citrus and memory. When I turned to make coffee, she stood in the hallway watching. "You're going, huh?" she said. I nodded. She exhaled through her nose. "Then I hope it was all worth it." "It was," I said softly. "And not for the reasons you think." I spent the afternoon cleaning, not out of guilt, but clarity. Wiped down the stove, dusted baseboards, vacuumed places no one saw. It felt like returning borrowed space in good condition. I boxed up the last of my things, mostly old receipts, cards from holidays where we both tried too hard, a photo or two with tape still stuck to the back. At the bottom of one drawer was the letter I'd written months ago but never sent. I unfolded it, read the first line, and tore it in half. I didn't need her to understand anymore. That was never the point. The folder was on the kitchen table when I came in with the last bag. She'd placed it exactly where I used to eat breakfast, neatly closed. I didn't open it. I just sat down across from it, quiet. She entered a minute later, holding 2 mugs of tea. I blinked. She hadn't made tea in months. "I figured," she said, placing one in front of me, "you'd want to leave with something warm." I nodded, took the mug. Neither of us spoke for a long time. She stared at the folder. I stared at the steam curling up. We both knew what it meant. A final offering, a final defense. I left it unopened. Today evening I loaded my car. 2 suitcases, 4 boxes, 1 watering can. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed but not tight. "You'll forget me," she said, voice smaller than I expected. I shut the trunk gently. "No, but I'll stop trying to prove I remember." She looked down, then back up. "I don't know how to do this. Say goodbye like it's not war." "Then don't. Just let it end quiet." Her eyes flicked toward the folder. "You really won't open it?" "I really won't." That at least made her laugh, just once. A soft, sad sound. As I stepped onto the porch, she followed me out. The garage light flickered on behind us, familiar. That light had seen us through so much. Shouting, silence, make-believe forgiveness. It glowed now like it was watching the last scene. "I never wanted to be the villain," she whispered. "I know." "I tried to protect you, even when it didn't look like it." I didn't answer. There was nothing I could say that would make her less wrong or less human. I just touched her arm lightly, and in return she didn't flinch. She just stood still, under that pale light. I drove away slow. No music. Just tires on pavement and the quiet tick of turn signals. At the end of the block I looked in the rearview mirror. She hadn't moved from the porch. The folder was still in the kitchen. Maybe she'd open it herself someday. Maybe she'd burn it. I didn't care. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with balloons or applause. Sometimes it's just the absence of needing to be right. I turned the corner feeling something shift. Not a break. A release. And for the first time in years, I didn't look back. The new place wasn't much. Small, quiet, smelled like primer and cheap pine. But the lock clicked shut behind me with a clean sound. No one waiting inside. No one peeking around corners pretending not to care. Just me and a single folding chair I borrowed from the neighbor across the hall. I didn't even set the boxes down at first. Just stood there staring at the bare walls, breathing. It was absurd, really.
How still it was. No drawers slamming upstairs, no muttering in another room. No, I didn't mean it, murmured from behind a half-closed door. Just silence, but not the heavy kind. The good kind. The kind that made space for a beginning. I bought a lamp the next day. It flickered once when I plugged it in, like it wasn't sure about staying. But then it glowed, a soft amber warmth. I sat on the floor and ate dinner next to it. Canned soup, 1 spoon, no bowl. And it was enough. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not my sister, not the friends who'd warned me years ago, not even Lily. They'd find out in time. But for now, I needed the quiet, the not answering, the not defending. There's a strange peace in having no one to explain yourself to. And maybe for the first time, I wasn't lonely in it. Just free. On the 3rd morning, I woke up to light pouring through the uncovered window. It was too bright, unapologetically so. I blinked at it, then pulled a hoodie over my head and stepped out onto the little concrete stoop. No porch swing, no creaky railing, just air, trees, cars passing. A man walked his dog and nodded at me. I nodded back. That was it. No judgment, no history. Just the kind of acknowledgement you give someone who might be figuring things out. The dog wagged its tail. I almost cried at that. It's funny what kindness looks like when you haven't seen it in a while. Sometimes it's just being left alone. I started making lists again. Not grocery ones, not errands, but tiny hopes. Paint the wall above the sink. Buy 1 mug you like. Take a photo of yourself, not to post, just to remember. They weren't ambitions, just anchors. Proof that I existed, here, now. That this place was mine in a way the last one never had been. No rent receipts tucked in drawers. No emotional invoices I couldn't pay. Just choices. Quiet, ordinary choices. One morning I even laughed at the sound of the kettle boiling over. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it felt like a beginning. Sometimes I still heard her voice, usually late, usually when I stared too long at the ceiling. She'd say things like, "Don't twist this around," or, "You think you're better than me." But the words didn't land like they used to. They floated, half-formed, then dissolved into the plaster above me. That's the thing about ghosts. They can't haunt you once you stop opening the door. And I had closed every door behind me, even the ones I thought I'd left cracked. I left the folder behind, I left the mug, but I carried the lesson. I wasn't hers to finish, I was mine to begin. One evening, I took a walk with no destination, hands in pockets, streetlights just flickering on. No one knew where I was, and no one needed to. I passed a bookstore still open and stepped inside. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions, just smiled. I bought a small blank journal. On the first page I didn't write anything grand, just a date. And then this. You don't have to win, you just have to stop losing yourself. I closed the journal and held it like a promise. The garage light was behind me now, but inside me, a different light had switched on. I didn't go back for the folder, not when I remembered where I'd left it, not when I thought of all the receipts still inside it, crumpled, angry, proof of every borrowed thing never returned. Let them have it. Let it yellow in some drawer pressed beneath unpaid bills and hollow apologies. I didn't need it anymore. I'd memorized the cost, and I'd stopped paying it. Some debts are generational, some are spiritual, and some, you learn, were never yours to begin with. I forgave myself for believing I owed anyone a lifetime of silence just to keep the house standing. The first time I saw Lily again, it was accidental. Parking lot, grocery store, Sunday morning sun. She was holding a bag of oranges and talking into her phone. When she turned and saw me, her expression didn't falter. She just smiled. A real one. Not the kind we used to wear like armor. She held up the bag and said, "Still your favorite?" I nodded. Then we stood there for a beat too long.
Not awkward, just real. I didn't ask about her mother. She didn't ask where I'd been. We weren't that anymore. But we were something else. Two people who had loved and left and learned. That night, I walked home slower. The sky was the kind of blue that forgets to turn black. Windows lit up one by one, a world going on without me. And for once, I didn't feel like I'd been left behind. I felt outside it all, but not exiled, just choosing. Choosing not to chase reconciliation like it was owed. Choosing not to build bridges that always collapsed under weight not mine. I passed a window where a woman was dancing alone in her kitchen. She looked ridiculous, joyfully so. I laughed out loud, then kept walking. The world was full of people beginning again. In my apartment, the kettle whistled. I poured water into a new mug. It was a dark red one, smooth and heavy, with no cracks. No stories attached to it yet. I held it and looked out my window. No garage light here. Just a street lamp that buzzed occasionally and lit the sidewalk like a stage. I watched a boy ride his bike in lazy circles below it. No audience, no performance, just being. And I thought, maybe that's what healing is. Not moving on, but just moving differently. No folder in hand, no eyes behind me. Only forward. Later I opened the journal again. Wrote more this time. Names I had forgiven. Truths I had swallowed. Lies I had stopped repeating to myself. I wrote them down without flinching. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. Just wrote. And when I was done, I folded the page once, twice, then tore it out. I lit a match and let it burn in the kitchen sink. Watched it curl into nothing. It didn't feel like revenge, or even justice. Just release. Like opening a window after a long winter. Letting the air say, now. I don't need to be remembered. Not by them. Not even by the old version of myself. But I will remember the night I stopped waiting to be rescued. I will remember the stillness. And the sound of my own breath in a room that didn't echo someone else's rage. I'll remember the cheap lamp, the red mug, the sound of my own footsteps on a clean floor. That's all. Not a triumph. Not a finish line. Just this. A woman standing in her own kitchen, whispering thank you to no one. Because no one handed it to her. And yet, she's here. Alive. Whole. And finally, free. Posits didn't raise my voice. I didn't break a single rule. But I read the fine print, followed the trail, and let silence do what shouting never could. In the end, she packed her words right alongside her ceramic angels and freezer meals. Said it was time to travel. Said she needed space. What she never said was, you were right. And that's fine. Because this story, my story, was never about proving a point to her. It was about learning that peace doesn't come from being quiet. It comes from knowing exactly where your boundaries are and holding them, even if your hands shake. If you've ever been underestimated, used, or quietly replaced in your own home, I hope this story gave you something. Strength, maybe. Or just the reminder that you're not alone. Now I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Tell me the moment you realized enough was enough. And if you believe more people should hear stories like this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, the calmest voices carry the most powerful truths. And we're just getting started.